Honestly, I was planning on skipping this movie entirely. When I first saw the trailers, I thought, this looks like an awful movie, and we would see it every time we went to the theaters. We'd see the frickin' trailer. But then I noticed it came up on Netflix Instant one day, and so I thought, you know what? I'm gonna give it a shot. I have to say, I was a little impressed by it. It was actually quite good, for the most part. But I have to admit, it has one of the worst scenes I've seen this year. And I have to say, the main story of this movie is a lot different from what the trailers told you it was. Ultimately, it is about a boy that is far too little for his age. Like, he's half the size of his classmates. And of course, being little, he's picked on, doesn't have a lot of friends, but his best friend is his father, and he has quite the wild imagination. But World War II has broke out. Pearl Harbor is pretty fresh in the memories of the citizens. And because the older brother is unable to fight in the war, even though he wants to, so ultimately the father gets drafted and he has to go fight in World War II against the Japanese. And of course, all the little boy wants is for his father to come home. And after being obsessed with this magician superhero, and after what his priest tells him, the little boy embarks on a few tasks that will help build his faith and hopefully give him enough faith to bring his father back home. But surprisingly, the film has a little bit more to it than just that. Now look, I went into this film thinking that, okay, this is going to be an awful movie, it's going to be really bad, and it's just going to be something I can put towards the bottom of my list. Usually when I think that, sometimes a film can actually surprise me, and I actually kind of like it. Little Boy actually had some surprising elements to it. For one, it's not just about this little boy that's trying to bring back his father. Ultimately, the main lesson of this film, other than faith, is actually about treating people the same way despite their race. This film's visual style is actually quite stylistic and actually kind of cool. There's also a lot of paranoia and propaganda in the town. And of course, most of the civilians, if not all the civilians, are quite prejudiced to the Japanese because that's who they're against at the moment. For the most part, it has a very classic family movie style to it, and it feels, maybe it might feel cliched to some, but it does feel more classic. I like the lessons that it teached, and it wasn't all too overly preachy to me like other faith movies. The movie definitely gives enough evidence where you can believe either faith really made him do all this stuff, or it was all just a big coincidence. So as ridiculous as the kid moving a mountain sounds, it does give evidence that maybe it was just one big coincidence. And so ultimately, it's for the viewer to decide, and I like that. Acting-wise, many of the kids, especially the main kid, were quite awful. Now, the main character did have some good moments, that's for sure. But for the most part, it was just, or just plain horrible. Especially when he tried using his powers. It's shown a little bit in the trailer, but I didn't realize just how annoying it would actually be in the movie. Because he's clearly trying to concentrate as hard as he can, but he would also have this really annoying grunt or scream-like thing coming out of his mouth that was quite laughable. Yeah, whenever he tried to use his powers, this is what he sounded like. I think that's a little overdramatic, but you get the picture. Now, as for the adult actors and the actors that have quite a few movies under their belt, they all did a really decent job. For me, there was three main standouts. One was Emily Watson, who plays the mother. Second best, in my opinion, was Tom Wilkinson, who plays the priest in the movie. But quite honestly, the best performance for me comes down to Shang Shun. Yeah, Shang Shun is in it. I'm not gonna pronounce his name, his real name, but I remember he was Shang Shun in the Mortal Kombat movie. And he was really excellent in this movie and the standout performance. He plays the Japanese person in this town that does get picked on and does get discriminated against. Now the actor that played the older brother in this film, he was, I know he was a Disney actor, like Disney Channel actor. I think it was Wizards of Waverly Place or something. His name's David Henry. Yeah, I have mixed feelings with him. It's hard to tell if I disliked his acting ability or just disliked his character. It's really hard to judge this time. In this one, he's the arrogant brother that's really discriminatory against the Japanese because he's the one that actually wants to go out to war, but he can't because of a condition. And so he takes it out on the Japanese citizen that lives in town. Now, as you would imagine, he goes about a change by the end of the film, but the change is really forced and there's nothing to build up to that change. And I have to admit, even though this scene was supposed to be dangerous, it was supposed to be intense, what happens is the Japanese American is brought over to have a family dinner. Well, the older brother comes home, sees him in the house, leaves, gets a shotgun and points it in the guy's face. I know it's supposed to be intense, but there's something about it that made it really funny to me. I'm not sure what. Maybe it was because I knew he wasn't actually going to shoot the guy because this was a PG movie. Maybe that's what made me think, oh, it's not as dangerous as it should be or as intense as it should be. But there was something really off about that scene. And that's a weird issue with the little boy, is that there's things that indicate, yeah, it's definitely a family film, where it's trying to simplify and hold back on the dramatic and the dangerous and some of the more violent parts of the film. Like, it tries to dumb it down, and I can understand family films doing that. I don't like it when family films do that, but I can understand why they do it. But at the same time, there are scenes that are clearly meant for adults, but it still has that dumbing down just with the rest of the scenes. And so even though it is consistent, it feels like a movie that doesn't know if it wants to be a family, more kid-friendly movie or a family, more adult film. Because it does have these moments where there's war and where this older brother points a shotgun at this guy, and when they try to torch a person's house, there's elements in there that feel like it needs to be more of an PG-13 or even an R-rated drama. And I do have to admit that even though I didn't care too much about most of the main characters except for the Japanese American, I did find some of the ending, well, most of the ending, really great. From the moment the little boy has to choose between two people and the parallel event that is happening during that choice, all the way to the eventual ending, is pretty damn good, except for one moment where there's a burial. That scene is kind of off because the kid isn't that really good of an actor. Everything else towards the ending is really good and I found really entertaining, and even though I didn't enjoy or didn't care too much about the characters, I still felt emotions coming. I felt like, hey, this is actually pretty sad, and hey, this is actually really inspirational. And I think that's because the movie was actually still pretty good throughout. Now, just like Dark Was the Night, there is something holding it back from being a decent score or even a 3, and that's because it definitely has one of the worst scenes I've seen this year. I know I don't like spoilers, I know I don't want to give things away, but I have to talk about this scene because it is just so horrifying. What happens is this kid has been going out by the shore, he's been pointing at the general direction of Japan, and he's doing his magical thing, wanting to bring his father back. And he does this every day till he has enough strength or enough faith. And because it's a small town, people actually see him do this, and they wonder what he's doing, and they kind of contemplate what exactly is going on. And I think this happened sometime after the mountain moving incident, and so people actually believe maybe he can do it. Maybe he can end the war. Well, the scene that happens is one of these days after he's riding on his bike, heading to the shore to do his thing, when a crowd of citizens all just gang up on him, and they're like, little boy, you did it, you ended the war. And the kid's just completely confused, right? As anyone would. But they're just so nice, and they're just like, oh my god, it's actually ended. And one's holding a newspaper and points, look, little boy, you did it, and points to the headline. And the headline has something to do with dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. Yeah, the citizens of the town believe that the little boy managed to somehow control the dropping of the bomb and drop it on Hiroshima to end the war. And so they start talking to him like he's some sort of messiah. And they think it's a sign because the project of the bomb was little boy, and he's a little boy. But the most horrifying thing about this scene, the most terrible thing about this scene, is the little boy just sort of thinks about it a little, and then suddenly he just brightens up and he goes, I did it! I did it! My father's coming home! And then they're like, yes, little boy, your father's coming home! And he starts riding on his bike. He's like, I did it! My father's coming home! Ah! And he's just so happy. And this is a film where ultimately the lesson is to treat other races like you would treat yourself, and not to have prejudice against races. And even though, yeah, this probably adds up to some of the paranoia and some of the notions that people had about the Japanese, it still feels so horrifying. Thankfully, the next scene is him seeing a movie about the effects of Hiroshima and seeing the destruction, and then him having nightmares about it. So ultimately, he does feel regretful of the thing that happened, but it doesn't exclude how horrifying and terrible this scene was to me. So ultimately, I think it is better than a 2, but is definitely not a 3 for me. So I'm gonna give The Little Boy 2.5 stars. I was surprised I would even give it 2.5 stars. So, have you seen The Little Boy? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. And as always, this is BruceGifford, and this is Just My Opinion.